Recording is on.
Hello everybody, and here we are for a brand new lesson of our JavaScript module. I'm super happy, as I was mentioning to you before we started recording, to see you all here, and that we're keeping the numbers pretty constant. That's super great. Today I wanted to let you have some more fun by using the DOM inside of JavaScript. I have prepared some fun slides, just two or three of them for you. So one quick thing that I wanted to have a little overview at is this week of learning. We are going to learn about the DOM today. We are going to develop and understand more some JavaScript internals tomorrow, in particular scoping and this keyword. And then Friday is going to be fun day and competition time. And then we will have lessons again next week, which is going to be our last week of lessons. So I have prepared two projects to you that I wanted to show you today. We'll see how much time we have and how much you feel like I'm overwhelming you with information. So the two projects that I will build for you are, let me show them to you. I need to uncomment this to show it. Let me go on lessons, having fun with the DOM, color flipper, starter. This is the folder, terminal, new terminal. Let's start the environment. Oh, I know why this is going like this. Sorry, little unexpected behavior. So let me create a new folder first. Sorry. Basically, if you're wondering what happened is I'm using live server and it didn't find the index.html file because I probably started from this point instead of inside of the folder. So that's why it's breaking my project. Let me move to bin, copy this. There you go. 1 second. There you go. Okay, so it should be, let me close this. And then if we're lucky, everything should work. My Visual Studio Code is set. Live server. Yes, there you go. Okay, so in case you're wondering what I did right now is simply start live server. In case you don't know what that is, check out our latest lesson. Unfortunately, since I had to copy and paste, probably I lost my linter configuration. I'm not going to waste time using that because I always use that and I always encourage you to do that. Unfortunately, I had this problem now. So for this project, I'm not going to use my classical linter configuration. Are you wondering what that is? Check out the previous lesson that I did, and you will discover how to improve your code with the linter, with Prettier. I hope you all did your own work and set up your environment to work better with JavaScript with the tools that I taught you. So the first project that I wanted to show you today is going to be a quick color flipper. What's a color flipper? Simply, it really changes color once you click on a window, kind of look like a disco. Oh, I love this color. And I like very flashy colors. And so you might be seeing things that you have never seen in JavaScript. We are, sorry for the noise. We are triggering some events based on a click on a button. We are changing colors. We are interacting with HTML. So what's happening exactly here? Well, we are using the DOM. So what is the DOM? That's the single question that I want to answer in this lesson. The DOM, which stands for Document Object Model, is a programming interface for HTML documents. And basically, it's a structured representation of our web page, and it has been ideated and created so that with our JavaScript code we can interact with the with the HTML code. So basically, again, the DOM is a programming interface, meaning, of course, that we can interface with it, and it represents a structured version of our HTML page, structured in a way that lets us interact with it with our JavaScript code. If you search for what is the DOM on JavaScript, I looked at on W3 School, you can see an incredible, like, this is a very good representation. So basically, when a browser gets a web page, it creates a DOM, so this tree of objects, and you can see that the entry point is an object called document, and we have seen what objects are. And then basically, you can see we have a tree structure. So you have usually in HTML, you have the head tag, and inside of that, you have title, and then you have the title of inside of that tag, you have the title of the page. So you can see that in the DOM, that kind of follows like a children or sibling structure. So you have head, and then you have the title inside it. Why? Because title is put inside head. Or for example, you have the body tag, and inside of the body tag, you may have an A element, an H1 element. These are put one next to the other because they are siblings, meaning that they are not one, the child of the other, but they're little, we can say, brothers. So this is how actually web pages work, let's say, on an inner level. And with this structure, we can use that with JavaScript to modify our web pages, just like we will do in our project. One thing that I wanted to tell you is this. JavaScript can be used outside of the browser. You can use it for Node.js, for example. So get this in your mind, because this is very important. The DOM is not part of the JavaScript itself. When you run JavaScript, you run it in a particular environment. What is our environment right now? It's the browser. And the browser is giving us support for using the DOM. And to be honest, it's giving us support for a lot of things, including timers, the fetch API, which we will see further in the course. So what are all these things? Well, those are called web APIs, application programming interfaces. So the DOM is part of the web APIs. So really, if you see let's say, job application asking you to be able to work with web APIs, basically that's what it means. So if you enter web APIs here on Google, you will see that there is a list of everything that the web API gives you. Let's type for DOM, and you can see that we have DOM. But you also have the console API, super cool. You also have the Bluetooth API, geolocation API. Just click on that and go get, let's say, more skill in that sense if you want to understand in detail, for example, the geolocation API. So basically, what we're going to do today is going to use some methods, some functions, some utilities that the web API give us for working with the DOM and realizing this super cool color flipper. Chat, is that clear for you right now? Can you hear a background noise? Oh, okay, that's great. That's great. Alessandra, you have your microphone on. I ask you to please. Oh, thanks. Okay, so that's great. You have seen our program, and actually this is the code. I'm going to comment it for now. So I will then, at the end of this lesson, provide you with the source code. First, what I want to show you is the index HTML file for this project. So can you please mute your microphone, guys? I guess some of you have it turned on again. Yes, thanks. Again, it's a mecha. Sorry. So we have a simple HTML page. We have our navigation with page title. Let's flip this color. It's this part that you can see here. We have a main tag. So then we have a container. we have our button, which is this, and then we have a simple span, which I styled. Really, it doesn't really matter the style right now because it's not that important for the purpose of this lesson. So let's try to break down this program and what he has to do. What he has to do basically are three things. The first thing is when I click on this button, I have to generate a new color and set it as the background of my page. Then I have to print the current color, the current hex here. So basically, let's say we can separate the generate color in two parts. So we get to three main items for this program. So generating color, setting the color. And, this is a very exploration lesson because I want to show you that, hey, with the DOM, with this API, you can do a lot of cool things. For example, change the color of your page, changing text. So let's do it. Let's separate our items first and do one thing. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to show you is that in JavaScript, thanks to the DOM API, you can select a DOM and HTML element. How do you do that? Well, remember that when working with the DOM, our entry point, as I was mentioning to you, it's an object called document, and that's what we're going to use. So, for example, let's say that I want to get this button, okay? So the index.html element I want really to get this button with the class flip color. How do you get it? Well, let's say flip color as a variable, and you already know what that is. And then I'm going to say document.querySelector. Okay, so I'm going to first flip color console.log. Flip color is flip color. Okay, you can see I don't have my linter, so I have semicolons right now. Let's use the console. Okay, so I want to show you line by line what is happening here. So basically, I'm using the DOM API, and I'm saying, okay, DOM, I want to get the button element. And this is very similar to the problem that you have of getting elements in CSS. So how do you get it? You get it using either the ID or selector. We are not in CSS here, so you have to use a function. And can you see this syntax? The syntax of a function? I've showed you what that is, and so make sure you check that out in case you missed that lesson. And so basically I'm saying document.querySelector, which selects the first, returns the first element that is a descendant node of that matches selector. So basically I'm saying, give me the element in my HTML file with the class, because you see we have the class selector here, flip color. And actually that gets stored inside of the variable flip color, and then I can print it. One thing that I forgot to show you when talking about objects, can you remember that this is, for example, how you define an object, is that not only you can have key value pairs, for example, like test 10, but you can actually give, for example, to test2 a function assigned. And that's really what is happening here with document. Just imagine document as a big object that the browser is giving us. And that document has a function as a key called querySelector, which is equal to a function. And that function gives us, let's say, give you back the element. So then we just call it with the already seen dot notation. So we can say document.querySelector and store the return value into something. In our case, flip color. So that was first example, your first example ever of using the DOM. Was that clear to you, everybody? Oh, yes, I can increase the text size. Sorry, I forgot about that. Was that clear to you? Yes. Perfect. So sorry for the small text size, I forgot about that. So now that we got that element, what we want to do, as mentioned, is say to the browser in our program, when you click, I want to hide this for you, this text, this, let's say the already written program, but if I save it, you can see that Visual Studio brings that back in. But for now, let's just remove it. I don't really need that. I don't want that to distract you. So now, as mentioned, we want to say, hey, I want you to change the color, the background color, when you click on a button. When you click, or in a more abstract way, when something happens. This behavior of do something when something happens is actually, people who wrote this interface for the DOM thought about it and said, maybe our developers want to make something happen when something else, some other behavior triggers, and they did it. They provided this tool for us. How do you do that? Well, I want to say flip color dot add event listener. So basically, remember that we have our button here. Now I can use this variable as we just use any other variable that you've seen me using in this course. So I can print it, I can use it in a loop. Since this button, this variable is storing a button and HTML element, I can add to it this function, which is add event listener. And this function takes two parameters. The first one is the type of event that we want to listen for. So when this happens, I'm going to do something else. And this something else that happens is stored inside of another function. So let me explain to you what is happening here. Basically, flip color gets a method, because that's how it's called when you apply a method as a value to a key inside of an object that is not a function anymore. It's called method. And we are saying we add an event listener on a click. So when we click on this button that is stored inside of flip color, we want the code inside of this function to happen. You might be wondering, why do we have to use this function as a parameter for add event listener? Well, because in JavaScript, you can pass actually functions as arguments to other functions, because JavaScript supports this kind of behavior, and it's very useful. In particular, in our case, this behavior is called callback function. So basically what we're telling to our code is, okay, on click on this button, we're going to call a callback. So that just means like, I'm going to call you back when this happens, It's kind of a very appropriate word to describe this function. So, hey, when this happens, I'm going to call you back and you will run this code. Okay, so is that clear to you guys, for you right now? Clicked on button. Clicked on button. Can you see that? When you click on this button, what kind of event? Click, run this code. Is that clear to you, chat? Okay, perfect. Axel would like to speak. I will keep questions for later. Sorry, otherwise, the lesson will become too long. I don't want this to become too tedious for you. So we have done this, but remember that we want to change the background color. So here we have to do other two things. Generate a background color. Generate a random background color. And let's say use that color as the background of our page. Okay, so super cool. So what we want to do here is, let's tackle first this point, generate a random background color. So how do we do that? Well, the way in which this color flipper was ideated, it's very smart, because in HTML and CSS, you can use colors in different ways. For example, you can express it as white, you can express it using RGBA. You have already seen that with Sunil. But you can also use hex. So for example, FFF or 0, 1, 2, and I don't know really. It goes from 0 to 9 and from A to F. So you can go from like 0, A, F, E. So that's the thing. So why don't we just generate, why don't just we create a color that is, for example, an hash, because hexadecimal colors start with an hash, and then we generate the 6 digits that come after it, just randomly. How do we do that? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that we want to do this operation repeatedly. Okay, so up to 6, because that's the number of digits we want to generate, we're going to create a random value, which is either a number included from 0 to 9 or A to F, because those are the values that you can include here. This repetition reminds me of a loop. So let's try to do this. Let's say that my new color is this as a starting value, okay? And then I want to say, I want to iterate up to 6. And what is it that I want to do here? I want to actually generate my random background color. So how do you generate random values in JavaScript? This is a very good question for the problem that we have. How do we tell JavaScript pick a random value between, the ones that we can possibly give to a hexadecimal color? Well, first of all, it would be nice to store this value somewhere, So let's say that we have hex digits. And what are these hex digits? Those are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then we have, if I'm not wrong, A, B, C, D, E, and F. So these are all the possible values that you can give to an X, right? As we were saying before. So you have const color equal string. And it can be either 0, 1, 2, then you can give it B, C, F. So we use an array, which is a concept that you have already seen, to store these possible values. And now it will be ideal to kind of get a random value for each iteration of our loop from this array. We can do that, and I want to show you how. We can say, for example, I'm going to write a function for doing this because it's something that I might use again in the program, and I want to isolate this logic to, let's say, use the don't repeat yourself principle. So let's create a function, generate random x digit. This might sound like a very long function name. Just remember, when you don't know what kind of name to use for an entity, whether that's a variable or a function, just go with a longer name. You can always correct it in the future. For now, I think this is appropriate. It's always better to have a longer but more descriptive name than a cryptic one. Just imagine I did something like generate random x digit. Is that clear to you? I don't really think so. So what is it that we want to do in this function that we're going to call here, generate random hex digit? Well, we want to find a random, actually hex digit between the ones that we can possibly get. So how do you do that in JavaScript? You say, okay, let's say const random digit equal. And to generate random values in JavaScript, use a special function which is called random. Random will return a value between 0 and 1, with 0 inclusive and 1 not. So for example, let me show that to you. Console.log. And in case you're wondering, yes, you can do console.log from the console. Math.random. Oh, I didn't need to use that. You see? It always generates a number between 0 and 1. And I want to generate a number between 0 and the last possible index of this array, which, how do you get that? Well, for example, let me show you. What if I want to get a random value between 1 and 10? I can always multiply the value by the maximum number that I want to get, for example. Add random multiplied by 10. Now it doesn't return me any more, just 0, a number between 0 and 1, but every possible value between 0 and 10. So let's do the same with the possible index that we can get for hex digits and say mad.random multiplied for hex digits dot length. And I'm going to do one more thing here, which is going to be weird to you, but let me explain. I'm wrapping this value inside of another function, still provided to us by the math object. What is math.floor? Well, math.floor basically rounds to the lowest digit a value. So if you say math.floor 2.3, you see we get 2. Why am I doing this? Because if I generate a random value and I want to use that as an index using math.random, I can't use 2.3461. That's not a correct index for this array. I gotta get just 2. So how do you do that? You use math.floor. Math.floor takes in an expression as a parameter. This multiplication is an expression because it returns a value, so I can use that. And now I can say console.log. I don't want the console.log that immediately here. Let me see if I can show that to you directly in the console. Hex digit has already been declared. Oh, I hate when that happens. Let me just say const random digit. I want to show you how this works with some logs. Digit. We got 11 now, which we 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, which will be letter B. So that was actually, successful in generating a random value from the array. And class, is that clear to you? Yes, a random means, just a casual value from the array, one that it's not pre-decided. And so now that we generated that value, we can say return hex digit, random digit. Why are we doing this? Because here we got the index of the array. We have a random index that we can possibly use for this array. And so we then return that value from this array at that index. So this will possibly be, this can possibly be one of all these values. Let me show you how this works. Let's console.log generate random hex digit. I'm going to show you this happen 6 times. Click. See, it generated a B first, a 0 second, then it generated 2 3s. When you see this in the console, because something was printed more than once, and then it generated 2 A's. So this is actually working correctly. Am I right? Okay, so I see that some of you will have to review that again. That's perfect. Don't worry, guys. I will give you the code, and you can always ask me a question or rewatch the lesson. The DOM, it's something hard at the beginning to wrap your head around. So now that I have selected, I have generated a random hex digit, what do I want to do? Well, I want to use that to compose our eventual final color. I want this to end up to be something like 1, 2, A, B, E, F1. How do you do that? Do you remember the thing about type coercion? Do you remember that if you add something to a string, that something becomes part of the string? Cool, right? So what happens if I do new color plus equal, and I go generate random hex digit. So basically here I'm saying 6 times add to this hash a random hex digit. Sorry, I have to use this that we generated. I want to console.log color. Let's see if this is working first. There you go, it's working. So for every iteration here, what we're doing is for starting from 0 up to 6, what we do is we add to this string a random value that we generate with this function, and that can be, you know, one of these possible array values. So in our case, from this example, on the first iteration, this function returned 3. So we assign on the first iteration, we added 3 to new color. On the second iteration, generate random hex digit, generated, what was that? I don't remember. Oh. Anyway, let's say it generates B. So B will be added to new color again, B. So that's how we are composing the new color variable, you know, by using a lot of kind of the resources that we learned up to this moment. Here we're using loops, we are using type coercion, we are using functions, we're using arrays, we're using the DOM, and we're using generating random values. Do you see how many concepts this simple program has? It's just crazy. So I hope that is clear for you what we did to create this, to compose, because that's how I like to say that, to compose this variable. It looks good. Is that clear to you, chat? In the meantime, taking a sip of water. Yes. Clear. Perfect. Sorry, I'm thirsty. So we have to do one last thing now. Let's remove this console.log. I don't really need that. And that thing is use that color as the background of our page. Did I tell you that actually you can set the style of an element using the DOM API? That's correct. That's something that you can do. How do you do that? Again, you're using that entry object, which provides us a lot of fun things to use, such as, you know, query selector, and you say document, and we want to say body. Why body? Well, basically, I'm just saying, as I mentioned to you, let me go back here. This is the DOM. And you remember this graph that I showed you earlier? Can you see that document is the entry point of our DOM? Well, can you see that it actually has access to body? Why? Because body is inside of the document itself. So it's kind of like if the document, as I mentioned to you, was an object, and this object as, you know, head, and HTML goes here, and then it has body, and body goes here, and then as mentioned, it has functionalities such as query selector, and query selector is a function. So, you know, just imagine as a big object with which provides you access to HTML elements and functions. So now we can say document.body.style, because that's how you set the style using the DOM, dot background color. And you can see that we're not in CSS here, so you have to use camel case, which is basically, as I already explained to you in lesson number 1, this attitude, let's say this practice of splitting multi-words variables with a capitalized letter. Background color, we can give a value to it, and we can say new color. So basically, after generating this color here in this part, so we can say color generation. Let's split that with a smart comment. don't do this in your code tendentially. I'm just doing this to show you this kind of comment. And here we have the part where we use that color as the background of our page. So hey, document, I'm getting the body that is inside of you. I'm gonna set its background color to this new color. Let's see if this works. Super, super cool. Can you see that? Now, every time that I click, this event listener triggers because JavaScript says, hey, you clicked on flip color. I gotta do something. What do I have to do? The code contained here in this function. We create a string, new color. We generate 6 random values, adding that to new color using type coercion. So we eventually end up with a hex like this, 0, 1, 2, B, A, F, B1. And then we use that color. We set that color. We generate it using the DOM. Again, let's do it. And you can see that every time we get a super cool random color. Was that clear to you? Thank you for your words, Oleksi, if that's how you pronounce your name. I hope that that's correct. At the end of the lesson, you will eventually be able to fix my pronunciation. Okay, I'm great that you're also getting the gist of it, Azaya. So, can you remember that we're actually forgetting one thing, and that is setting this value, because here we're saying background color is F1, F5, F8, and that value stays static. But that's not correct because the X color is changing every time. And so if I change this, I want to see here the X color of this. If I click here, I want to see the X color of this background. How do we do that? Well, this current color is being printed here, it's a setting information inside of a span, and this span has a class of current color. Let's see if the DOM provides us some cool way to modify the text inside of an HTML element. Spoiler, you can. How do you do that? First, you select the element and you say const current color. Used as earlier, as I mentioned to you, pre-selector. How do we select that? It has a class of current color. You can see I have that here. So I'm sure I'm getting only this element. And remember, we have a span is stored in this variable. And now what I can do is, after setting the background color, so I'm sure that the user is seeing the new color, I can say current color. And as always, a span is stored here. So I can perform some, actions that normally I couldn't perform on a variable, because you can do, let's say, something like const first name equal Piero, and then you do first name dot body dot style. That's not something you can do. You can do it that when in a variable you have an HTML element like we have here. How do we get that? We select that with document.query selector, and now I can say current color, our variable, our span, dot text content equal new color. Let me see. Can you see what's happening here? Well, first of all, it works, so super cool. What are we doing here? We're selecting that span element, we're storing that inside of a variable, and then we're using the functionality text content equal new color, and we're assigning to it new color, which is, can you remember, the string we created. If I did something like Piero, you will see that every time we click, you get Piero. Really, you can put anything here as long as it produces an expression. So I understand that some of you may be confused at this point, because you might be saying, like, how do you know all these methods? How do you remember them? Well, let me clarify something about the DOM. Usually, this operation that you have seen, for example, of modifying the content of an element, of an HTML element, in modern days is done by using a framework. So I would never do that in my work because I use React. We don't work with the DOM. And I've never worked professionally with the DOM in a project. It was just really unnecessary because you always use a framework tendentially. It might happen to you that you use the DOM in a professional environment. In general, when you want to use it, just remember that using the DOM is a set of functionalities and a set of utilities to perform a certain, to get to a certain goal. So if you really want to do something, I suggest you just search for it. For example, let's say that I want to, I don't know, modify the color, modify text of an HTML element, JavaScript. I just encourage you to do this kind of searches, and you see the first thing that pops out is the text content property. And you see a very cool representation, a very cool example. So what I want to tell you is don't get discouraged if you don't know all the methods. I don't know them too. I really know like 6 or 7 of them. I just search for the things I need when I'm working with the DOM. You can't possibly know everything. And the more you work with it, the more you will learn new things. But remember that it's not something that, it's an important concept, but modifying values using the DOM tendentially is not being done anymore since we have JavaScript frameworks. Googling is amazing, yes. So Googling is somebody, as I have Googling time. Yeah, to be honest, before this lesson, I was working, because I'm a software developer full time. I Google all the time, every day. There's no day I'm not Googling something. And sometimes it's also a concept that I've seen many times. It's just that it's okay if you don't remember syntax or how you do something, or if you search exactly, hey, how do I do that? And you get the answer from Stack Overflow. You can't possibly store every information about a language you need in your head. It's impossible. So don't even try. Just get really good at Googling, study the languages, practice, but never forget that Google is an amazing tool. So do you want to see one more quick example of the DOM that I wanted to show you? Or do you want me to stop? Because maybe you're overwhelmed or... Okay, I'm already got 3 yes, 4 yes. Okay, one more for sure. I'm grateful for your enthusiasm. Let me close this. Let me go in my folders. Let me open another project, which of course I prepared because to be honest, it's not random. Everything that you're seeing, it's okay. So JavaScript model, we have this here. Let me copy this. Let me copy this. I'm doing the same thing that I did at the beginning of the lesson because I created a wrong folder structure. Okay, let me drag and drop this project here. I entered a Star Wars Easter egg in this code. Can I be honest with you? I don't like Star Wars, but do you know lorem ipsum, the kind of text that web developers enter as a placeholder? If you go online, you can also find things like Star Wars ipsum. Or I think you can even, and it generates lorem ipsum, but with the theme of Star Wars. You can see Lucas ipsum, dollar, Sid Ahmed, Jar Skywalker button. Or you can also do, I think, cat lorem ipsum. Yeah, a Fourier make muffins. You can also use cat lorem ipsum. So I just did that with Star Wars because it was fun. Purr like an angel. Your pillow is now my pet bed. So, okay. Again, this is my structure, my HTML document. You can see that it's very easy. First of all, let me start the project. Terminal, new terminal. Okay, live server. Show model, of course, this doesn't work now. what I want to do is for you is to be able to show the content of this model when you click on it. So it's kind of reiterating over a concept that we already seen in the previous example. How do you define a model using using HTML? Well, to be honest, a model is simply a combination of a button, which we have here, with the class button, open model, you see, with the text of show model. And then you have a div, which is hidden. And right now it has a class hidden because that class applies a style of display none. So there is a div, but it's hidden at the moment thanks to this class. And inside of that, if I remove that, I'm going to show you, you have simply a content with in a galaxy far away and a button to close the model, which is this one. And I'm using ampersand times to generate this X. But yes, what is that I want to do in this program? Again, and I'm also showing you this because I want to encourage you to split the task that you have to confront yourself when writing a program. And I have to, let's say, how do you say that word in English? Find, let's say just find when the user clicked. And when the user clicked on show model, right, show model button. I don't know why this is happening with this color. What is happening here? I Visual Studio go crazy. Let me try again. Okay. Find when the user clicks on the show model button, open the model, and close the model when the user clicks on the X button, which is the one I showed you earlier. It's this one. See, I removed the class hidden. It's the div is not displaying on anymore, and I just show it. So find when the user clicks on the show model button. That's easy. We already learned how to do that. And the button to open a model actually has a class. You know, if there wasn't a class here, I would just write it. So I have a way to select the button with JavaScript. So I can say const open model. And I can say document.querySelector with get me the element or the HTML element with the class of open model. Let's print the result of this operation. Let's see if we get it. And there it is. You see, it's actually a HTML element. And now what I want to do is find when the user has clicked on it. Again, we already did it, right? Open model dot add event listener. When the user click, execute the code inside of this function, this callback function, execute code here. So what do we want to do here? Okay, let's get rid of this point. We have done that. Open model. That's what we want to do inside of this code. So how do you do that? Well, there isn't a way actually in using the DOM where you can say, hey, this is a model, just open it. You just have to play around with CSS, right? So can you remember that I told you that if I remove this hidden class, which applies a style of displaying on to this div, the model becomes visible, right? Well, so if I can do that manually, why don't I do that automatically by simply saying here, remove the hidden class from our open model button, right? So if I remove that, when you click on it, on this button, the div won't have a display none property applied anymore, and it will become visible. Can we do that in JavaScript? Of course. How do you do that? let's select this div, this model. So const model equal document dot query selector dot model. So we selected this element here because we want to do something with it. So inside of this we have our model, and now we can say here model, and this is again one of those utilities I'm going to show you. I learned them by watching them and using them for personal projects. If you search for how to do this, you would have found that immediately. So again, don't never get confused or frustrated with the DOM. Just search for things, Model dot class list, and basically here we're getting all the classes that this element has. Let me bring that to you. Console.log model dot class list. Swigger. That is cool, right? When we click on this, we print on the open model button, we console.log our model that we got with document.querySelector class list. So basically we're saying JavaScript, hey, give me all the classes, the CSS, the HTML classes that this element has. And you can see we have them in an array. The first one is model. The second one is hidden. And that's actually correct. Model, hidden. Let's add a third one. Academic. Let's do this again. You see, it's academic. Super cool. So I can now say class model dot class list dot remove, and I'm telling you remove. What kind of class do I want to remove? The hidden one. Hidden one. So basically, again, on this model, which is an HTML element, we can perform certain operations that we can't perform on normal variables. And in that case, we can access its class list property, kind of like if this was an object, class list property. And the class list property has a method called remove. We can call it, and as an argument, we pass the name of the class that we want to remove from our HTML element. So what can we expect now from our code? We can expect the hidden class to be removed once we click on the open model button and to actually see the model. Ready? Done. Super cool, right? Was that clear to you, chat? I read that somebody's angry. Yoda ipsum, yes. Perfect. Now, so we did this. Perfect. So we got our class list and we got our model open. Now what we want to do is the reverse operation. So we want to close it when you click on this button. I'm gonna go quick over that. How do you do that? First, we want to perform an operation when you do something with that button, that close model button. So let's select it. So close model equal document.querySelector. Let me see the class it has. Class close model. Of course, you already find the class that I will use here because I have prepared examples. So I knew that I was going to need a button with the class of close model. If you just created this from scratch, you would just have a button, but that's no problem. You just add a explanatory class name to it and use it. Dot close model, and inside of this we have our close button HTML element. Okay, and so instead of listing on the click on the open model, we have to do it on close model, because when you click on this X, close model dot add event listener on click, execute the following code. And the following code, what is it? Well, it's actually pretty intuitive, right? If I removed hidden from the model to show it, does that mean that if I add the hidden class again using display none, that will be hidden? That's actually how it is, because again, if I remove it and I come here, it shows. if I put it back again, it hides. So you can see this is pretty intuitive. And so let's just say model.classList.add, again, very intuitive name. And we say hidden, our hidden class. Let's get back to it. Show model, click register here, and we apply the class hidden. So that's how you open a model using JavaScript and how you close it using JavaScript. Super, super, super cool. Was that clear to you, class? Piero, why don't you show the class appearing and disappearing in the console? Yes, if that is clear. I'm gonna try because let me understand if what Sunil is saying.
I can tell you if you want. So, I didn't mean that. I mean, so go back to Chrome.
I thought you want me to show the class list.
I was just thinking of a more visual way to show. So not necessarily the class list, but go to there and then click on elements instead of console. And then open. Yeah, so you should be able to see hidden appear and disappear. So I just meant that. That's all.
Yes, exactly. You see, when we click here, it gets reapplied, and when you go here, it disappears. So yeah, that's a good advice, Sunil. Thank you so much. Or you can see I printed the class list directly, and you can see that when we open it, you only have one class name, which is model. When we close it, you have model and hidden. So to be honest, that was it for today. It was a lot. You may not think so, but it was a lot because we saw basically every concept that we studied so far: object, functions, loop. We didn't see the if statement, but that's okay. And we used the DOM, generating random numbers. So that was a really intense lesson, and I hope you enjoyed it, everybody. So it's quite of our post-lesson Q&A, and so feel free to ask me any question here in the chat, or raise your hand with the specific tool you find down below. Thank you, Rachel, for your compliments. Sunil, you have a question.
I have a couple of questions. Yeah. So
really?
It's funny because I know the answers, of course, but I'll pretend to act like I don't.
To be honest, I think he doesn't know them. It's just.
I'm trying to get as much information as I can in preparation for Friday.
For Friday, I'm afraid that we won't use the DOM Friday. So.
Well. Any information about JavaScript will be useful, huh?
Yeah. Don't just make this is unavoidable. Your defeat is unavoidable. No, I'm joking. So ask me.
Sure. Okay. So I've got two questions and then one just comment I wanted to make. So I'll just ask the first question first. So one thing I thought that might seem a bit confusing to people is noticing you do, say, math.random, math.floor. What is this math thing that you're doing? Like, where has that come from?
Well, that's a very good question, actually. Actually, as you know, JavaScript provides us some utilities, so the if statements, loops, and it provides us in particular this object called mat. Let me see if I can print mat for you by resharing my screen. Let me also open my webcam. Sorry. Okay, can you see my screen?
I can see you as one tab. Like one grid rather than you being the full screen. So you might need to click on your own screen.
Oh, I clicked on it.
I have a feeling it's going to show like that for everybody else. Try double clicking on yourself. Yeah, that seems better now.
Okay. Hopefully the lesson was recorded. So if I print mat, you can see that it's an object and it has various functions that we can use. It's kind of similar to document. So basically, the language provides us this object which has many functionalities. In our case, we use two functions that come from it. One is floor, and you can see it's listed here, and the other one is random. So hope that was clarifying to you, Sunil.
Cool. Yeah, I was just curious to know where it came from. So yeah.
No, of course it was. That was a great question.
I have a couple of other questions, and then it looks like we've got some really good questions coming up in the chat. So I'll get through these quickly. You're talking about how we have to use camel case when referring to certain things on the DOM. I can't remember. Well, background color, for example, you have to write background in lowercase and then color with a capital C. So what would happen if we tried to write that in, say, kebab case, kind of like how we typically end up writing CSS?
Well, let's see what happens. I should go back to the other example, but let's just say that I delete this and I go document.body.background color equal. I'm gonna just set one random for now. Did I turn off my live server? Oh, document.body, sorry, .style background color. Okay, so we set it here. Let's try to write it differently. Background color, for example. Well, you can see, first of all, that this is not the correct syntax. So did you mean this kind of syntax in your question, Sunil?
Yes, yeah, basically that.
Well, you can see that Visual Studio Code is breaking right now. Sometimes you can perceive that your code broke because colors of the editor are not working properly. So basically, this is kind of a behavior reinforced by JavaScript where you have to use camel case for using this name. So the short answer to your question is, if you don't use background color like this, but you use, for example, kebab case, it's just going to break.
Cool. I guess as well, because there's the reason why we end up having to use camel case in JavaScript is because the minus symbol or the hyphen is a minus, isn't it? So it kind of tries to interpret it as background minus color, which I guess makes no sense.
This also happens, for example, if you have an object and you have a key pair, so let's say background color, and this is FFF, and you try then to do background color. You see, this also breaks, right? Because JavaScript can't interpret this minus correctly. Because it says, is it the operator minus? Like what are you trying to do? With objects, you can actually solve this by wrapping key in strings, and you can actually use it like that. But with document.body.style background color, this is not possible. You can't just wrap this.
Cool. Actually, one out of interest, I don't know if this is right, like you can do this or not. Ibrahim's talking about it in the chat as well, and that's exactly what we're kind of talking about. If you undo this for a second, undo what you've just done. So background color on line 1, what if you use that as like square bracket notation? Does that work? I've never tried that before in that regard.
I'm sure it will work like this, and it does. For example, let's try.
And what about with a minus and kind of like writing background color like CSS, for example?
I'm sure it will. It does, actually. I didn't know this too. It does work like this.
It's definitely refreshing as well, isn't it? Yeah, cool. Oh, okay, awesome.
Yeah. I discovered one more thing.
And then the only thing I guess I wanted to say was just about the DOM and how, because I think some people were possibly like felt that they needed to revisit it and things like that.
Yes.
And I just wanted to make a comment that all of those elements that appear in the document object model will be the elements that the developer creates. So, for example, when all of you have been doing, say, the first 4 weeks of homework, and you're creating those HTML documents, those elements are what appear inside the DOM. So, like, for example, when Piero's doing document.body, it's because there's a body element inside of that document object model. So they shouldn't, the things that appear in there will be the things that you, the developer, have created. So there shouldn't be, there shouldn't be anything random in there that you're not expecting. I just wanted to point that out, that it's exactly what you create as you're going through it.
I also wanted to answer some more questions that we have in the chat. So that was a very good point, Sunil. And because, now that we're learning more things, for example, Ibrahim asked, how long should I stick to a specific language before moving on to another? Because, he's still discovering, like other students, a lot about CSS. How do you balance learning CSS and JavaScript? Well, I think we will give you two different answers, me and Sunil. If you agree, Sunil, I will go first.
Cool, go for it.
Well, just see everything that you learn new as a power-up of what you're doing. So if you just learn HTML and CSS, and you now learn JavaScript, you don't have to spend all your time with either JavaScript or CSS. We're doing that here because I want you to focus exclusively on JavaScript. And remember that JavaScript is separated from the browser. So we're using that in this environment right now, but we could use it in, also for Node. But if you just learn how to create HTML and CSS pages, and you just also learn JavaScript, don't think that now you don't have to, check out HTML and CSS anymore. Just do some brainstorming and think, how can I integrate JavaScript in my knowledge now that I've learned it? For example, you can use it for creating some super cool animations, or you can create, I don't know, like a to-do list, or integrate some special functions inside of your HTML, CSS code. So that's the same if you integrate, React. So it doesn't mean that you don't have to think about HTML and CSS anymore, but how do I integrate React in what I already know? So let's make a more complex web app. So that's kind of the behavior that I suggest you use. Go bigger and always upgrade your code with your newest learning.
Cool. So the only thing my perspective on it is similar to a question that I got asked in one of these Twitter spaces a few days ago. And if I bring it back to your question, Ibrahim, of how long should you stick to a specific language, before moving on to another? Well, there's a couple of things I want to say. So firstly, when we were covering HTML and CSS, there's a reason why you were given 4 pieces of homework that to some extent felt similar, but there's a reason why I gave you many rather than just 1 piece of homework. And it's for you to go through that repetition and feel comfortable with what you're doing. There's no point moving on if you don't understand what you're doing. What I see too many new learners do, and I did it as well, and I'm sure Piero has done this as well at some point, is that we learned something and then we just quickly move on. We try to move on to the next thing because we're trying to just accumulate as much as we can. But we all know that the only way to really kind of consolidate something and let it sit in your long-term memory is through repetition. So you can't just expect to, it's like, for example, with this lesson that Piero has just taught you, you can't expect to just now feel like you know the DOM and you can move on. Like, of course, the lessons will move on, but you as a student are expected to go and revisit that topic, read up on it, and continue to do so until you're at a point where you can just use those functions off the top of your head because you've used it so much.
And we also did repetition with for loops, functions. So you see, learning is a process of getting in contact with something new, repetition, repetition, building on top of that with more repetition, and then build that in your mind.
Yeah, exactly that, and that's the really nice thing about for me personally, like getting to watch these lessons rather than teaching them, is that I can see Piero using like a previous topic again, and then like adding a new thing into it, and that's how learning should be for you as students. That you can take those things that you learned in the last lesson and use them in the next one, and kind of like add new things on there. I mean, I look at learning, or I try to at the moment, as programming languages are no different to the languages that we use for communication. And what I mean by that is, most of us can speak some English and maybe whatever native language it is for you. But if I decided today that, okay, I'm going to try and learn French and Spanish, and maybe I'll try and learn some Mandarin, maybe I'll learn a few words in them, and then next week I think, okay, let's try and learn some Russian, let's learn some Japanese. I can't learn all of these things in like simultaneously. Like the only way I'm really going to make real progress with any of these is if I say I spend lots of time learning French, and then maybe I go and live in France so that I'm constantly speaking it and hearing people and immersing myself in it. Then maybe I can move on to the next language.
Yeah, that's a super good metaphor, because when you learn a language, for example, when I learn English, I just, they told me, okay, so the basics. So this is how you use the verbs, how you use the subject in English. And, we didn't just skip to teaching academic and use the full English dictionary, but it was, okay, so you learn this, what's the weather, or what is your name? And I will repeat, and then I will learn some new constructs of the language and but I will still be using the, let's say, previous ones that I learned in conversation. Because if I learn, for example, how to say what's the weather, and somebody will answer to me, I was practicing my listening, I was practicing, explaining things and making affirmations in the language, or asking other questions. So it was a very good metaphor. So repetition and repetition. I saw that some students were also worried about something that I said. And because I said, normally you use a framework when developing a modern application. So if you just know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you can't find a job as a developer. I don't know what's your take on that, Sunil. I will tell you from my experience. I like to teach you in the sense of, there is a problem, this is how you solve it in the language. Modern applications, modern framework like React, Angular solve so many problems that you have when developing an application. So, for example, instant re-render, managing lists, or creating reusable parts of the UI. So it's, it would be silly from companies not to use them. And I found that for a front-end developer position, the minimum is to know at least some framework a little. That's not a problem for us, because we will go over React, so you will learn it. So that's not a problem. And in my experience, I've never found a company that would just ask you for vanilla JavaScript and HTML, CSS. And at least they would ask for some framework experience, knowledge, not experience, but knowledge. What's your take on that, Sunil?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, definitely. I mean, I try to, if I use communicative language again as a means for explaining my opinion on this, it's like learning a new phrase in another language, and knowing when to use it because of the social cues. So, for example, okay, I guess in Italian, if you do somebody a favor and they say thank you, you might respond with saying prego or prego, which is like you're welcome. But if I didn't know that it meant you're welcome, but I just kind of know to use it then that's how I feel it is if you learn a framework, but without learning like the underlying mechanisms, or in this case, something like JavaScript or vanilla JavaScript. It's like if you just jump into using frameworks, okay, fine, you might know when to use it, but you don't understand what it means, or like what the word means and things like that.
I have a movie metaphor. Have you ever seen the movie The Concert? The Concert is the movie about this violinist. She plays violin. She's so famous. This girl's so famous. She's about to play Moscow. And she studied the basics of music, kind of like we studied the basics of languages like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And suddenly she meets this homeless person in the subway who plays the violin. And this person makes a particular noise with the violin, which is great. And she asked him, "How did you do that?" And he said, "I just put my finger here and I did it." So that's to say that he was good, but to be honest, not as much as you would imagine, because he didn't have any basics. He was just doing random things. That you can also do that with the language. Just speak the language because you heard that. That's very common for some people who move suddenly to a country. So,
cool.
But you have to know the basics to really progress. I don't know if that was meaningful, but that was a scene that really hit me when I saw that.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense in that. I mean, it kind of, and the thing is as well, there's nothing bad about almost skipping the fundamentals and kind of just going straight to using a framework or something like that. In the case of something like CSS, using Bootstrap or Tailwind, but I think there's so much more to gain with understanding the underlying mechanisms. It will serve you well when it comes to progressing in your career.
It will serve you incredibly well, especially for JavaScript, because I might you just imagine, there is a little, how do you call that animal, which is like insect, which is red, and
like a spider or mosquito or
no, a ladybug.
Ladybug. Okay.
I left her. They bring luck, so I will open the window then for the ladybug to escape. The JavaScript is the best for me. Learning like the basics is the kind of best investment you can do, especially with JavaScript, because really frameworks are really an extension of the language. So when you use hooks, you're using closures. When you use React components, you're using functions and classes. And to be honest, for example, in the company I work for, all the interviews are based on JavaScript, even if we work in React. So learning the basics really sets you up better for the future, because frameworks are just a way of setting up your application by using concepts that are no foreign to JavaScript. It's plain JavaScript being used in a particular way.
Cool. Just to pick up a couple of things. So Chantel says, but Sunil, if you have a French, a Russian, a Hungarian, etc. friend, and you speak with them, you will get better as you talk to all of those friends when you meet them. Yeah, I guess so. I can't disagree with that as such. Although only if you're speaking with them, that's the difference. If you're speaking with them, then you're practicing, you're getting better at something.
Ibrahim made a great example. If you play Super Mario, and this is actually a concept that people who make video games are very careful with. If you play the first level, it's okay. If you directly try to play, let's say, the 10th level, you're going to have a problem, because you're going to meet a boss and you don't know, or like a character, and you don't know how to beat it, because you don't have the learning curve made of trial and error. So basically, maybe you don't know that if you get a Yoshi, you spit fire and you kill the enemy, or maybe you just pick up the game and you just go against a Goomba. You know what a Goomba is? It called Goomba?
A Goomba.
You go against the Goomba. If you don't go first for your first through the first level, you're not going to know that you got to jump on the Goomba head to kill the Goomba. So before learning Java React, jump on the Goomba head of JavaScript, and then you're going to grab a Yoshi and slay front-end development.
Exactly. There you go. Were there any other questions that came in earlier?
I hope some person doesn't just see this lesson on YouTube and see me telling students grab a Goomba and kill and jump on the Goomba and grab a Yoshi.
Hey, well, by any means necessary, whatever helps the learning process.
Exactly.
So I think maybe this is what you've spoken about already. Raji said, so one cannot be employed based on his or their knowledge of vanilla JavaScript except with framework. So I think, actually, no, you did cover that already, I guess, didn't you? You were talking about, yeah, okay.
Mainly, yeah, you need a framework because people want it, but you're going to learn it, so that's not going to be a problem. Just think that if you really know the basics, it's going to be very, very easy for you. Don't make the error of using a technology without knowing how to use it properly, without just by using it without thinking about what's going on behind the scenes, because you will soon find yourself in troubles in coding interviews or when things get hard. For example, you have to structure a project or you have to use some best practices over others. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, one thing as well is, believe it or not, my first job, I didn't know any JavaScript frameworks at that point. I knew a little bit of JavaScript, but it wasn't necessary for that role. I mean, that was a junior position in a kind of a small company. But I mean, I would look at it as this, like CSS, if you're getting into web development in particular, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are they're non-negotiables. You have to know them well if you're going into web development. The other things, such as React, are bonuses, and it's the reason why we teach you them. I mean, we could have picked any framework; any of them would have done the job. But we picked React for two reasons, I guess. One is because that's what I know most about out of any of the kind of main frameworks. But more importantly, it's because the market share dictates that there are more React jobs than there are Vue jobs or Angular jobs, at least globally anyway.
I started working with Angular. To be honest, I haven't heard from Angular now in a long time. Really, the big fuss in front end right now, it's React. And if you want my advice, I see that something called the Jamstack is coming hard. So maybe React and Gatsby or something like that. It's coming very hard in the front end world.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Jamstack seems to be gaining momentum. That's for sure. And one thing I'd just say as well is I get really.
Since I mentioned the Jamstack, everybody wants to use it. No, I'm joking.
Well, this is it. Like, this kind of actually harkens to what I was about to say in a way. Like, I saw somebody tweet just before this lesson. They were like a new developer, kind of, in a similar situation to many of you in here, and they wrote a list of all of the things that they've been learning, and it was massive. There's about 20 things on this list, and the idea that somebody is trying to learn that number of many things in a short space of time is just counterproductive. There's nothing that you can benefit from in trying to do that. And this is why I will often say, if you're getting into web development, you shouldn't need to know more than about 6 things. Like, you shouldn't need to know those 5 or 6 things really well, and then you can start to progress onto other things like specific databases or whatever. And Jamstack's one of those things. It's like it's useful, and Piero's not saying this to say you need to learn this now or you should learn this now.
Yeah, it's just
an interesting
momentum.
thing.
It's also like, always understand that companies want to know how you will benefit them. And how you will benefit them depends on what kind of experience you have, what kind of languages do you use. So you don't have to learn 100 things or put them in your CV, because that's just going to be distracting for them. But if I wanted to be hired to a company right now, I will tell them I know HTML, CSS, React, GraphQL, and Node. 5 things. But I work with Java, I work with a framework called Next.js, I work with Bootstrap. I'm not going to add those things. It's not relevant to that company, how, for my position. I just want to highlight how I can be helpful for them. So really be good with 3 or 4 things and you will be set. And if you're lucky enough to learn a technology when it's about to explode, then hire me and Sunil to work for you because you're done with your life. Because, for example, I don't know, maybe in the early days, if you learn to use React, now you became a guru, and you can do mainly what you want. So I think that was it. I will stop recording for now. From Stackademic, this is all. Peace for this lesson. See you tomorrow. And I will also tell you to use, guys, that next lesson will be tomorrow at the same time. The signature Piero's clap. Exactly. Stop recording.